day and welcome to the Greatest Hits of DRGR conference call. Today's conference is being recorded. At this time, I'd like to turn the conference over to our first speaker for today, Vincent Grady. Please go ahead, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the HUD Greatest Hits of DRGR webinar. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you'll be muted until specific instructions are for taking questions. We will take questions at the end of the presentation. If you have questions, please change your feedback box from green to purple to let us know that you have a question. The feedback box is in the upper right corner of live meeting. When we see that participants have questions, we will let you know that you can ask your question by pressing *1. If your question has been answered, please remove yourself from the queue by pressing *2. Once you're finished asking your question, please change your feedback box back to green. At this time, I'd like to turn the webinar over to Janine Cuneo with ICF. Thank you.
Thanks, Vinny, and welcome everyone to DRGR Greatest Hits. Myself, Janine Cuneo, will be presenting, as well as Mark Mitchell from HUD, our DRGR administrator and guru. As Vinny said, we're going to run through our slides. We have screenshots as well as diving deep into performance measures and prior period corrections for you. And then we'll take some Q&A at the end. We're going to try to leave quite a bit of time for you guys for Q&A, so don't hesitate to write in those questions, and we'll definitely get to as many as we can during the end of the webinar. We're going to talk through activity types, performance measures, then some troubleshooting, trying to help you guys for common problems that we're seeing out there and how to troubleshoot yourself to get you through, and then, again, Q&A. Let me jump right into activity types. Many of you might question, why are we talking about activity types? I'm actually a year and a half into NSP 1. I know what we're doing. I know how we're doing it. I want to stop and focus on this because your activity type directly relates to the performance measures and accomplishment data in DRGR. So again, activity type per each activity directly relates to the performance measures and accomplishment data. So I just want to kind of pause and recap what activity type looks like for you as an NSP grantee, what you're going to need to think about and why and how you're choosing an activity type, and then we're going to jump into the performance measures. So we're going to just stop for a moment, and as you all remember that are seasoned DRGR experts, for those that are new, when you are doing in the action plan module, that's where you set up your activities. And they're broken up by responsible organization, activity type, national objective, and, if applicable, a multifamily building complex. And in the activity type, it's quite straightforward on how to choose these activity types. And we're going to talk through a couple of those. Some of your common activity types that you see as an NSP grantee is rehab reconstruction of residential structures, admin or administration, construction of new housing, clearance and demo, land banking acquisition, and then land banking disposition. I think the most confusing aspect of dividing the program into DRGR activities is selecting the activity type. So I want to give you guys an example here. Many of you in one unit are acquiring the property, tearing that property down, constructing new housing on that property, and then you're also incurring disposition costs when selling the property, for example, closing costs, as well as some project delivery costs, i.e. your rehab inspector has gone and checked the progress of the work periodically. All of those might elicit in your mind, okay, I'm doing acquisition, then I'm doing new construction, I'm also doing disposition costs. But many, many times in an activity in DRGR for NSP, you're able to consolidate those. So when you acquire a property, demo the property, then construct the new housing of that property and incur disposition costs, you're able to wrap that up into, for example, construction of new housing. So what I really want you guys to do is think through the life cycle of the property. Another example is if you're acquiring a property and then you're going to do rehab reconstruction on that property. Again, you can combine those activities, those different singular activities, acquisition and rehab, and put them all into rehab reconstruction of residential structures. So just something some of you have done in the past, some of you haven't. think through that. These are common ways to expedite your NSP work as well as simplify it. So when we're doing the activity type and you choose, for example, rehabilitation, reconstruction of residential structures, that, again, directly relates to the performance measures that you get to choose from. So right here I have on the right-hand side, that's part of your action plan in each activity. It's your page 1. You're choosing the activity type, the national objective, what kind of environmental assessment, what part of the process you are, environmental assessment, etc. Once you choose that, then it populates on the next page for you the different type of accomplishment data for a rehab reconstruction of residential structures. Why is that important? Each activity has maybe a little bit of a nuance that's different. Clearance and demolition, for example, have different accomplishment data than rehab reconstruction of residential structures. So you want to make sure you test that out. I'm going to give you guys a step back for a second for us. Each activity type, not only do you have to choose the, for each activity, in DRGR, you not only just choose the activity type, but then you also are determining by that activity type area benefit versus direct benefit. One great way I always think of direct benefit in a shorthand way is the end user here. For direct benefit, who are we directly assisting? So, for example, rehabilitation, reconstruction of a residential structure. Always going to be a direct benefit because we are directly benefiting that individual household that is going into that property in the end. So we're able to make that a direct benefit activity type. And you do need to go into each activity and make sure you clearly mark area benefit or direct benefit. And by doing that, you are also determining what type of accomplishment data you're reporting on. So, for example, here on the rehab reconstruction of residential structures, you see very clearly that we have not just the direct benefit that you're assigning, but you also are going to assign single family and or multifamily and renter and or owner. We're going to talk about all that a little bit later, but please make note, activity type and area benefit versus direct benefit are the things you need to think about per each DRGR activity that you enter. Let's go into performance measures a bit more. Many of you know, but I want to review, there was Release 7.0 in DRGR back in the fall of 2010, and that made a large change to the system such that many of the performance measures were not listed when NSP 1 and NSP 2 grantees first started using DRGR. And with this change, you are required to put more detailed information in both the action plan and then in your quarterly performance report or your QPR. Many of you have revisited the activity screens in the action plan to assure that you are both breaking out between area benefit and direct benefit, as well as filling out your performance measures. But there are still some of you that need to do more fine detail information or need to do prior period corrections. So we're going to talk through both of those today. So this is where you're going to see this screen. This is on your second page of an edit activity in the action plan module. And you have a choice right here in the activity of an area benefit versus a direct benefit.
Janine, if I could just make one point on there.
Please.
This is Mark. The one chart back on slide 9 that you saw, the area versus direct benefit, in some instances, the grantee will only be able to select one. So the one we've got selected, like rehab reconstruction of residential structures, this table here illustrates the fact that only the direct benefit can be chosen. So in other cases where you see both, under like acquisition, public facilities, it can be area or direct. So when you get back to that other slide, sometimes if you don't see an option, that means that the grantee actually cannot select anything because we've kind of predetermined it can only be one or the other.
Great, thank you. Let's talk a little bit more about what you're going to see on these screens, as Mark had mentioned. For area benefit, there's two ways in which you're going to define your accomplishment data, and it's either by census or summary. And so for the area benefit, you're going to literally walk yourself through the census screens that are available to you So you're able to define those tracks and block groups that you need to do to determine the area benefit that that activity is serving. Some of you may have done a summary, and so then you'll also be able to enter that data into the summary. And you're only entering that as the action plan.
And I'm sorry, again, this is Mark. It shouldn't say summary. It should be survey.
Oh, survey. Excuse me. Thank you, Mark. Survey data. We'll correct that for posting on the web. And that data is entered only at the action plan. For direct benefit, you're going to see some information at your action plan and then some information only at your QPR. So, for example, for your direct benefit screens, let's just give an example here, rehabilitation, reconstruction of a residential structure. For your action plan and your QPR, you're to enter your households, both owner versus renter, and housing units, multifamily versus single family, in both the action plan and the QPR phases. Remember, the action plan is when you're projecting out. For example, in one activity, we're thinking we're going to do 90 single-family owner properties. And that is what you will enter into the projected. At your QPR phase is what you will enter in your actual data. And that's only when you have hit an end use, when that individual household is identified and is entering that home is when you put in your actual information. For the FHEO screens, for example, race and ethnicity, that is also only at the QPR phase. And that is, again, because only at the time when you're directly benefiting that household will you know information like race and ethnicity. Let's just talk a little bit through how to enter in area benefit data. I'm going to walk through this quite quickly. Some of you are not using very much area benefit. So area benefit, as I said before, is census or survey. So thank you, Mark, survey method. And you're going to determine if it's census or a survey method that you're using for an area benefit to define that per activity. For census, there's 3 different screens that you'll be able to choose from. And that is, 1, you can duplicate another activity. Some of you have already entered in all your census tracts for another activity, and it's exactly the same as the current activity you're working in, so you can go ahead and just duplicate that activity, and you don't have to walk through each screen.
Right, and it's just going to be duplicating the tracks and block groups, no other information.
Great. Some of it is jurisdiction-wide is another option for you in the census, and the third is per county code, county name. And then you're able to do it further down for duplicated activity. As Mark explained, all you're doing is copy the grantee number and the activity number. No other information is duplicated there. Jurisdiction-wide, you're going to just go down to the county code and county name. But if you're going to the county code and county name, you're able to do it by census place, census tract, all block groups, or select specific block groups. You're able to get to that fine level of detail. For direct benefit, this is, for example, the rehab reconstruction of residential structures. You define it by households, owner versus renter, housing unit, single family versus multi, and then again, the fair FHEO information, fair housing, equal opportunity data, race, ethnicity, household, head of household. Here's an example for many people that are always kind of questioning what does this look like. Rehab reconstruction, I'm going to choose the benefit type is direct because that's a mandatory if you're doing rehab reconstruction of a residential structure. For this example, we're doing owner versus renter, single family versus multifamily, and then some of the accomplishment data that we'd put in there is energy efficient features or defining characteristic of a unit, for example, a low flush toilet, etc. Here's literally what it looks like on a screen for you. You're able to choose the direct benefit. By households, they are choosing owner household. Again, this is per how your program is working in NSP. For housing unit, you can push multifamily or single family. So if I look at this information right here, I see that this activity for NSP is owner with single family. And then if you scroll down on that screenshot, you're able to see that they're actually proposing 190 single family units. And of those 190, they're all going to be owner, and they're all low, 50% of the AMI or less. And that is how to read this screen. If you're ever thinking back, come back to this screen, listen to this webinar again. This is how you read these screens. Just to recap, so activity types determined our proposed accomplishment data, okay? All grantees are encouraged to enter data in the fields as applicable. I'm going to talk a little bit about required versus optional in a second. One thing that's really important for you out there that are doing NSP2 and those that have NSP3, you are required to identify and report on a certain green feature. If you look at the notice, it says all housing construction is required to be energy efficient and incorporate cost-effective green improvements. This is something to highlight here because it does not define for you what type of improvements those are, what is your selection, and there's multiple different fields in DRGR that meet or reflect green standards. So you need to review those and determine what works in your program. Something else I wanted to call out was the middle income, the direct benefit middle income line. Many of you know in DRGR, for NSP, the eligible households are low income, or 50% of the AMI or less, moderate income, which is 51% to 80% of AMI, and then middle income, which is 81% to 120%. However, in DRGR, as this is a system that has been adapted for NSP because of the speed in which HUD needed to get to help you guys as grantees enter information as well as draw down your funds, not able to get a middle income data, okay? So that is something you need to do as a grantee to figure out how to reflect that accurately in DRGR. So let me give you guys an example here. As there's no middle income data spreadsheet, you need to put in the proposed total the middle income. So for example, we have a grantee that is proposing 15 renter households that are going to be benefiting. 5 will be of low, 50% of the AMI or less, and 5 will be of mod, but also another 5 will be of middle income, 81% to 120%. You'll notice no middle income. You go ahead and load that into your proposed total. All right. I wanted to show people an example in a report, and these are reports that you get out of DRGR in the reports module of DRGR. You're able to pull quite a few reports, and this is Performance Report 1. And I wanted to show an example of a community that looks to me that they might have not done the adequate corrections that needed to be done after that recent release of the 7.0 in DRGR. And I just want to show you an example of why. You'll notice in the box for the rehab reconstruction of residential structures, they have not fully defined households or housing units. And how do I know that? Households need to either be an owner or renter, and housing units need to be single family or multifamily. And we don't see that being broken out for that activity. Okay, so that's something that automatically, by me pulling this report, you guys all have access as NSP grantees to this report. Feel free, pull Performance Report 1 and see if you have a field for households that are either owner-renter or housing units that are single-family or multifamily. If you do not, you're not fully completed this exercise and you're not accurately reporting. Another thing I wanted to show you was that very few communities will have low income projected numbers as well as moderate income projected numbers. Now, you might be an exception, and that's fine, but why I wanted to highlight this is most communities are not doing a mix in their activities in DRGR of national objectives. And remember, your national objectives are 25% of your grant funds have to be for 50% of AMI or less, which is our low category here. The other national objective is low, moderate, middle income. So in saying that, one of the activity types we break out by is national objective. And so this grant, this activity right here, 08, for rehab reconstruction of residential structures, that we have both low, 6 households that are going to be served, and 2 for moderate. If they have classified this as a national objective meeting the LH25, which is the 25% of the grant funds that are going to meet the national objective, 50% of AMI or less, then they may be in error, okay? They may be expending funds as categorized as their national objective of LH25 and error, and they need to go and look that through.
And Janine, and yes, so in that case, one of the things they'll be talking about then is typically the correction is they'll add another activity, and if they've already got draws on that, they'll end up having to revise draws against that new activity, because that is our biggest clue. If things are categorized incorrectly, is that we'll see, low and mod on, like you're saying, on the same activity. So this is the best way is to look at these reports or just on the QPR to see if you see that mix. And like you're saying, it's a clue to go and make some corrections.
Another kind of example to reported performance report 1 that looks to have prior to corrections that they've made. Not always the case, but in some cases, acquisition. Okay, many communities broke out acquisition versus rehab for a property. And if that's the case, you have the opportunity to go ahead and consolidate this activity acquisition into one of your rehab activities. If, for example, 10 Main Street, the expenses were acquired under activity number 4 that we see here, and then the rehab expenses are being used under activity number 8, you're able to consolidate those. Again, you're going to have to move budgets around as well as move potentially vouchers around. If you go to our intermediate webinar that was held and this stored on the DRGR, or on the Learning Center on the NSP Resource Exchange, you're able to walk through how to consolidate activities if you need to do that. But that's another example. When I read this report, I think, are they using 2 activities that really can be consolidated into one?
Can we talk about that one real quick? One of the reasons we talk about consolidating is that we want to make potentially reporting easier. If the draws have already gone on and they're complete, one of the other alternatives potentially would be to just note this acquisition. We do want to know what the end use is for any activity. So it could be that you could put a note in the activity that says this acquisition activity is linked to X number activity. So at least folks can see what the end use was for that. But unless you've heard otherwise, Janine, we're not urging you to consolidate activities for a policy reason. It's for potentially it being easier.
Yes, that's what I've heard, being easier, as well as, Mark, I've heard for NSP3 grantees, if you don't really have a lot of expenditures yet, which many NSP3 grantees don't, it is a good opportunity before any expenditures happen. It's very easy to consolidate as well. So
I agree. At the very beginning, it's always better to, if there's only one end use, there's no reason to have 2 activities. I just want to make sure that people don't interpret the fact that we're trying to tell you that from a policy perspective, you have to have only one activity. Again, if there is only one, end use, but you've already done a lot of draws, it's a lot of work to consolidate later on.
Yes. Another thing also about this, if you have one unit in multiple activities, so you acquire it in activity 4 and then it's rehabbed in activity number X, and once you hit an end use, you only want to demonstrate that end use in the rehabilitation activity at the QPR stage. But I highly recommend you note that in the narrative, as Mark was talking about. Here's for the performance measure a cheat sheet for you on what's required versus more what's optional or encouraged. This is the required information in DRGR. And this is a quick run-through for NSP 1, 2, and 3. You'll notice all the beneficiary data: households benefiting, income levels, renter, owner, single-family, multifamily, race, ethnicity, female-headed. These are required elements. You'll notice number of properties is encouraged, as well as the green measures for NSP 1 is encouraged, not required, but 2 and 3, it is in the notices that those are required. Please review what different measures are available to you for you to utilize for your program.
Before we go off that slide, Janine, I just wanted to make one point. Janine walked through on the one slide, especially the beneficiary data, again, the renter, owner, single-family, multifamily are the new kind of breakout categories that we added with Release 7 back in last September. So those are the ones that people are having to do a lot of prior period corrections. The one thing I wanted to make sure to emphasize is that other measures, like the green measures, there's a whole list of how many, Janine, like 10 or 15?
Quite a few. I have some right here. I'll skip ahead for a second. You can see some of these.
Right. So anything there's a beneficiary measure versus an accomplishment measure. Anything that's an accomplishment measure, you really do have to put in at least a 0, otherwise they'll never show up in the QPR. So if you can estimate, that's great, but I did want to just kind of, I'm sorry if I'm skipping ahead to some point you were going to make, but just wanted to make an emphasis that there's a slight difference between how things populate on the accomplishment measures versus beneficiary measures.
So, Mark, I think that begs the question many people ask, so I'll go ahead and ask that before we get a Q&A. So what do you see in the QPR versus the action plan if, for example, we do put in, if we don't put anything in, for example, for replace thermostats, do you get to see that at the QPR for that activity?
It won't even show up as an option if I remember correctly.
Yep.
You know, won't be able to put in any measure that you didn't at least put a 0 in. We'd prefer you to put estimates in, you know, because that way we can tell folks, you know, when Congress or, you know, media like USA Today, do folks estimate, we can roll that data up. But the problem is that any other kind of accomplishment data, front end, we really, you know, DRGR expects you to put something in, at least a 0, to say, oh, these are measures that I'm going to want to use in the QPR. So they just won't even show up if you didn't set them up in the action plan side. And that's something that's frustrating. You're working in your QPR, you can't put in the data. So that if you're already going to town and preparing your QPR and you have to go back and change your action plan, it gets a little frustrating. So just wanted to make that point so that people could make sure and fix those kind of issues ahead of time.
Thanks, Mark. I just wanted to show you guys an example of a performance report, one of a grantee, that really shows someone has gone back and went back to their action plan and documented owner versus renter and single family, as well as included some of those additional accomplishment measures that they would like to report on. So this is just an example, and I'm going to show you. You'll notice that there's owner for a household as well as single family units. So you'll notice in just this activity number 02 alone, they have broken out the households by owner and the housing units by single family. So I'm able to demonstrate that, as well as you'll notice that they've also told us that their proposed are 9 for mod, but you'll notice here their total for their projection is 17. What that tells me then is one of two things. Either they've made an error in calculation, or most likely what has happened in this grantee is that they are proposing to do 8 middle income units at 80% to 120%. So they're going to do 9 mod and then 8, if I'm doing my math correctly, 8 middle income units, okay? If you see this and this is not what you're trying to say, you need to go back and fully analyze what's happening. Again, this is an example of an accomplishment field data in the QPR, again, in the QPR for a community that has at least put a 0 in all these accomplishment data fields in their action plan, okay? Some grantees say to me, we're not exactly sure which ones we're going to measure, how we're going to measure it, and so they just put the 0s in so they have the option at the QPR. Something you can do. Other people know very clearly what they are going to be measuring, what they aren't, so they haven't done that type of, they just put in what they want to see in the QPR. Again, if you do not put in the action plan, you do not see it in the QPR, and therefore you're not able to report on it unless you go back to your action plan and make those changes. And as Mark said, that sometimes it can get a little frustrating going back and forth. So do your best to think about that early, or at least just put a 0 in. One area that Mark and I really want to talk through and talk about is prior period adjustments. Many of you had put stuff in prior to the 7.0 release, and there's kind of some issues around matching that, or you're still finding when you're putting information in your QPR that the cumulative totals and your current totals are not matching up. So we're just going to walk you through that a little bit, show you where a tool is on the HUD website, Community Connections, or comcon.org, and just walk you through that tool as well. So if there's any data in prior periods, DRGR automatically checks the cumulative totals for total households from the race ethnicity data and compares it to the cumulative totals by income level. If these don't match, then DRGR does display an error message. Many of you have probably seen this error message, and it's going to make you do prior period corrections before you can move on. And this is an example of one of those error messages you might see where it says, basically, the sum of the totals for your units for all the QPRs to date, so they look through cumulative, it has to equal your housing unit totals for all the QPRs to date.
Well, and in this example, you had housing units. Say you had 30. You picked single family, and you're adding 10 more this quarter. Again, it's going to check, and the numbers aren't going to match up. But this is the case where you picked just one of the subcategories, and those are usually the ones that, when it's one subcategory picked, that's the ones that people have the hardest time working their heads around.
We're going to walk you through how to review this data, try to get your head around it, as Mark was saying. There's two places that kind of help you with this. One is actually on the each activity that is a direct benefit where you're going to be discussing race, ethnicity, and income levels. You'll be able to see this view cumulative totals. And you can use that, and that will show you, and we're going to flip to that screen in 1 second. That will be able to show you all the data elements that have been done to date. It shows you your cumulative. Another way you can also do it is pull DRGR reports. And the two reports we recommend here is the Performance Report, or PERF Report 1, and PERF Report 6. And both of those will help you be able to figure out your housing units and your household data, as well as your PERF Report 6 tells you your race ethnicity data. Here's the example. This is, I'm going to go back for a second, excuse me. This view cumulative totals, if you click on this, on that link, pops up this information. And this is the screen that gives you activity level at the beneficiary data across all your QPRs that you've submitted, okay? And this is where you're able to see if there's inconsistencies and how and what you need to increase or decrease in order to get those to match up. This is an example where actually everything matches up. So I'm just going to walk you through it for a second. We're able to see that total cumulative actual total to date is 125. There's 19 for low and 106 for mod that have been entered in your QPRs. If I add up all my total households, again, we've only talked about total households, Hispanics low. We've entered it in at the owner category, and then it go ahead and sums up to the total. We add up all these information, 100, 10, 4, 1, 1, 2, and 7 per each direct benefit household ethnicity. You're able to see that it also adds up to 125. So you get a direct 1-for-1. Many people say, oh, Janine, do I have to have a 1-for-1 then also to the female head of households, which is the last category here, 38. That does not make you have a 1-for-1, as you might only have a certain percentage of the actual totals of direct households benefiting that are actually female head households. I'm also going to show you a method that I'm a big fan of. Mark has created it. It's a grantee tool, and it's called DRGR Beneficiary Census Area versus Direct Spreadsheet, and it's on the comcon.org/programs/DRGR. So go ahead and find this tool, and it's an Excel tool. I'm going to walk you through an example of how to use this tool for your benefit in trying to correct prior period adjustments.
Gene, can we go back to the last slide for just 1 second, though?
Of course.
Sorry. So one of the things that will happen, again, Janine mentioned about the microstrategy reports that are helpful, but one of the easiest places, again, is to look at the last QPR. if someone had just recently selected, since the last quarter, adding that owner households, this is an example of where you'd end up seeing on the total all those numbers that Janine's showing, but on the owner side, it might all have zeros in that one column in the middle of the page. And so that would, by looking at the last QPR, you can see those big imbalances. And then again, but I just wanted to emphasize a lot of times it's just one of the easiest things actually is to look at the last QPR after you've reselected and added a performance measure back to your action plan. That's it, Janine. So you can go ahead and with step A, B, and C.
Say that again, Mark. I'm sorry.
Go ahead with the step A, B, and C. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. No problem. So I'm going to walk you through this tool and literally give it a real clear example. So step A is you're going to be entering in what you want it to say. So what currently you want the QPR, your totals to say across all your QPRs is what you're going to do in step A. Step B is what is actually in QPR, in DRGR right now. Okay?
In the prior QPR.
In the prior QPR, what is in DRGR today. And then step C is it actually automatically calculates for you the in-quarter data for you to enter into your QPR, so you're able to bring your key categories, i.e. households, and subcategories, i.e. owner households, into balance. So let's walk through that for a second. Here's step A and step B, and then the next slide we'll go to step C. So step A is a grantee that has 139 owner households. 22 are low, 17 are mod. Again, this is an abnormal example in NSP because you really should be having all low in one category, but I'm just trying to be illustrative here for the sake of this tool. There are 139 units, households, but also 139 units you'll be serving, which are all single family. Of that, by all the information you've collected, that there's a breakout of those owner single-family households that are broken out between white, black, African-American, Asian, Native Hawaiian, other Pacific Islander, Asian and white, black, African-American and white, and other multiracial, all adding up to 139. Okay? You also have for the Hispanic breakout 40 Hispanic white, 1 Hispanic black African-American, and 1 Hispanic other multiracial. You'll also note for female-headed household, of those 139 households, 27 are female-headed households. Now you're able to see in step B, we have the prior, and this is the last approved QPR for cumulative totals. There were 125 owner units, 19 low, 106 mod. However, and this is a great example that Mark is talking about, a grantee probably never defined their housing unit by single family and multifamily. And so recently went in there and was like, oh, I need to define this as single family. They never did that, so they only have a total of 125 housing units, but we have no breakout of single family and multifamily. As well, they did no breakout of their FHEO data. So again, for step A, this is all the information that you as a grantee has collected. You need to make sure that your totals of owner 139, total households 139 units, and then the 139 of owner and 139 of totals all equal. So households, housing units all need to equal, for example, in this case, 139. If not, go back through your data and see where you're having a misstep. So then you're going to enter your step A and step B into the tool into the Excel document that Mark has created. And step C is the output. It calculates for you. And this information is the information you need to put into this quarter's DRGR so you can make that prior period correction and get to 139 in the end. It might feel a little awkward. You might be like, Janine, why am I putting in 139 single-family housing units but only 14 new ones happened this quarter. It's because we were trying to make that prior period correction of 139 that was never recorded before.
And just let me mention again, always, when you're going back to Step B, always make sure that you're actually basing Step B on what you really, really see. It's very tempting to just say, oh, you're reading through and you see total, the total of race breakouts, and then you fill in and put in the owner. If it's not showing on that prior QPR, don't put it in there, because I've seen a lot of times what will happen is the folks will actually kind of jump ahead and fill in what they think, again on Step B, and they still end up with the same errors they had from the beginning. So if you still get errors, go back to your QPR and double check that everything you put in Step B is actually correct.
Great. Anything else, Mark, on this?
No, sorry. It's just that we've ended up working with several grantees, and that's the one step that it's really easy to mess up is Step B.
Great. And this tool is used per activity, okay? So many people have maybe multiple activities and will have use this tool over and over again. So feel free to use it as you need, but do use it.
Yeah, usually as soon as somebody gets it, once or twice, then it becomes second hat. The hardest part is, again, getting through that first one, because one of the difficulties with DRGR is that it'll throw multiple error messages, and you're not sure which thing to tackle first. So there's always this or listed there, and you can have one of them fixed, but it's one of the others you haven't tried yet.
So would you say, Mark, the best thing then to do is really just stop and go through the tool in total, so that
yeah,
then you're
really
able to see every error that might be there?
Because people will end up they'll go to the next activity or the next activity and work on those, and they're still getting the similar kind of error messages. But after you work through the first one, then it gets a lot easier. There are going to be cases where we did, data corrections, or there's some complications when we talk about those performance measures and benefit types that have been selected. And there will be a few instances where there's no way that you can actually correct the data. Those are pretty rare. So, again, the steps are, first, use that worksheet. Second, contact the help desk, the DRGR help desk. Cynthia Carey from Lockheed has worked through a lot of these errors for people. And then in the last resort, they'll contact us to know, to try to figure out whether actually there is some kind of data correction that needs to be done.
But remember, that data correction going to HUD is very, very rare, very rare. So work through this tool, and if need, call the help desk to have them help you work through the tool. And rarely do they see.
Right, and when you do contact the help desk, if you can, send them a screenshot of that last QPR, screenshots of what you're putting in and with the error messages, and send them the worksheet. If you give them all those things ahead of time, then that'll really expedite the help email or help call.
Great. And I'm just going to go back for a second and remind people it's at comcon.org/program/DRGR, and the grantee tool name is DRGR Beneficiary Census Area versus Direct Spreadsheet. We're going to jump through some troubleshooting really quickly, and then we're going to start our Q&A for folks. Some common problem areas is administrative issues, performance measures, and then assumption that a property is LMMI versus LH25. For administrative issues, common problems we consistently see people getting locked out of the system, they're struggling to have access to reports or user roles and certification. And usually you have this problem as an error message pops up when you're trying to log into DRGR or, for example, to activate the reports module. And first, if timed out message, you can access reports module, really you got to wait for at least 30 minutes and let the system reset for you. And if you're still locked out, then you can call this DRGR help desk. And if you need any coordination with your field office, but really stop for 30 minutes, see if it resets.
And this is Mark again. Typically, it's if you have a connectivity problem or you've accidentally logged out. And when you do this, do ask for the words, I need a session reset.
Great, a session reset. Another big issue people have, especially many of you in the NSP world, we're seeing some new users come onto the system. Either you guys have increased reporting requirements because you now have NSP3 and you need some more support, or there's been turnover at your level, so there's new grantees. One thing we need to remind you of is that if you're a grantee administrator or if you're a user, you need to go bug your grantee administrator to not only activate you, but also make sure your certification status is up to date. That is something if you're a user in the system, you need to go talk to your city, county, state grantee administrator. If you are the grantee administrator for your city, state, county, then you need to call your field office. They're the ones, your CPD rep is the one that then certifies you. One way I highly recommend is if you're struggling with who has access to the system, who's certified, etc., is you can pull some reports in DRGR, and they can be very helpful. This one, especially the Admin Report 04B, which is your grantee DRGR users with system role and certification status. Example of that report is right here. I've blacked out usernames and user emails, but you're able to see, for example, a grantee, a user that is inactive as an account status but has been recertified. So that grantee administrator needs to go in there and make them active first. If you're not active and recertified, then a grantee does not have access.
Janine, I'm sorry. On this example, active and inactive is on the HUD side. So the certified and expiring and expired is on the grantee side. Oh, I thought,
okay, we'll talk about that then. Excuse me, everyone.
Sorry, we can activate and deactivate, but at the HUD, if it's a permanent thing, but again, the ways that grantees can say, this also the converse is true. If someone's left, you don't have to contact us to delete an account, which would read as inactive. You can actually just decertify them.
However, tell me if I'm wrong, Mark. It's still a two-step process on the user side, on the grantee side, to get someone into the system after HUD has activated them.
It is. Do you have that screen to show? Or?
I don't. I can pull that up during our Q&A, but I don't have that.
So basically, it's a two-step process on the screen. The grantee admin screen, and the same one the CPD rep has anybody that's expired is on the bottom right, ones that are about to expire on the top right, and the ones that are certified or recertified actually on the left side. So the hardest part, the most frustrating part is actually those expired ones. The grantee administrator and the CPD reps have to scroll down because a lot of times they won't even notice it. They won't see them. So that's one of the biggest errors in this one is that people won't even see the names on the list because they don't realize there's a scroll bar on the right to scroll down to the expired users. So, yes, folks have to it's a two-step process on the screen, but, once they've done that and moved them to the right box, from bottom right to top left, then they just hit save result, save profiles.
Right. And those are available to you in the intermediate webinar as well as beginning webinars that are all saved on the NSP Resource Exchange Learning Center for you guys to walk you through that process.
And there is an admin module user guide, and those screens show on that too.
Great. And so for this, the grantee administrators, again, those are the ones that are certified by the CPD rep field office. So if you're a grantee administrator and need to get recertified, please make sure you connect with them.
Right, and because we do get a lot of DRGR help emails that just say, hey, I need to be recertified, and there's absolutely nothing we can do about that on our end. You really do have to go to the right person, like Janine said, grantee users to administrators, administrators to CPD rep. And if you don't know who your CPD rep or contact is, there is a report for that one too, and I think it's the first report on the report list.
Let's see if we'll find it.
It's admin, see it says DRGR grant status and CPD contact. So that is the only person, if you're a grantee administrator, there's only one person that can certify you, and that's that CPD contact.
Thanks, Mark. So performance measures, we talked about some common pitfalls earlier. Let's talk a little bit more. Again, if a grantee doesn't see owner versus renter, single family versus multifamily, if you're pulling reports, et cetera, how do you solve that? Well, as we talked about before, you've got to go back to your action plan and make sure you're entering and selecting all the beneficiary data that's applicable per activity. A lot of times, too, we're seeing and have seen cumulative households or housing units appear to be over-projected with respect to what you're actually hitting. So I'm going to show you an example of that, but really usually what that means is a grantee has entered units in each quarter, and they're, rather than entering those in on an incremental unit basis, i.e. in the last quarter, we were able to accomplish 10 units that have met the end use. Instead of doing that, they actually go back for the last 5 quarters, which is actually 30 units that have been completed, and enter 30 in. And that, you'll see, just keeps adding up and adds up incorrectly. And I want to show you an example of where this may be the case. It may not be, but it may be the case here when we're seeing, for example, that they have projected 51 owner units, but 102, exactly double that as your total projected.
And if I could elaborate on one of those reasons we're seeing those, where they double and triple and quadruple. For some reason, some folks have gotten the impression that on, especially multifamily, that if someone moves out, that you're going to track every quarter how many, low versus mod, or, how many, the income categories of everybody that's in the multifamily complex, and that's not the case. I've heard that from several grantees now. As soon as somebody moves into that unit, you're going to report that, but you don't report as those units change. So that's typically where we see someone will say, every quarter they're giving us, again, like it's showing here, 51 in the fall, 51 and again in the spring, then it's 50, but they change those income distributions every quarter. But that's one of the biggest reasons we see, for this over-reporting.
And let me show you some key reports for the performance measures. We've talked about them a little bit during this conversation. So your Perf Report 01 is great to show you your projected versus cumulative totals of your performance measures, and it's sorted by activity number. Again, your activity number being the basis for how you report performance measures. Another one is Perf Report 03, which shows you your addresses that you've entered in. And lastly, your Perf Report 06, which shows you for direct benefit activities, those beneficiary statistics by household type, i.e. some of the FHEO, race, ethnicity, status.
So there, back on that report list, one of the things you'll note, though, it's a little odd, you will see things like those major categories in projected versus cum for performance measures. And so things like households and owner-renter will show up on that one and the last report on the beneficiaries. The only place you'll see the race ethnicity, though, is going to be on that one, on the bottom one.
That Perf Report 06.
Yes.
So you'll notice we're stopping and pausing and showing you guys reports, really, really encouraging you to use this reports module. It's an excellent tool for you as grantees to see what you put in to DRGR in a very simple, easy way so you can troubleshoot around your own issues and really get comfortable with what you put in there. I also find many grantees have used this as a reporting mechanism for supervisors, city council, et cetera. There's, not just these reports that tell you who's in the system and who has access to the system for you as a grantee, but also all your financial reporting information and your performance reporting. So use these as best you need. One great way is through troubleshooting.
And the report 2B is one if you looked at those cumulative reports and figure out that there is a big issue with your totals, if you want to go back and try to figure out which quarter did you start going wrong, or where there might be a potential error, you can go and look at that one particular report so you can figure out, you make a decision whether or not you actually want to request a particular QPR be unapproved so the original error is fixed versus doing, again, a prior period correction.
I also wanted to talk a little bit about some folks are struggling because when you have when you're pulling down or drawing down funds, you sometimes have to make a decision between is it going to be an LMMI unit in the end, or is it going to be an LH25 unit in the end? And most times you just don't know. If, for example, that responsible organization, that contract you have with that organization is that it's either or. And so you're going to make your best educated guess, but at times you might have categorized that expense as LMMI, but in the end, when you have the actual user in that home and you're able to demonstrate actual and use has been met, those expenses are actually not for LMMI but are for LH25, and they need to be moved and recategorized to a different activity. So two ways you can think through that is you can internally reconcile those funds at the next draw if you have another draw coming up relatively soon, or you can always revise the percentage of funds per a voucher into another activity. And again, voucher revisions can be, you can look through the intermediate webinar for how to revise vouchers. Lastly, we're just going to talk about who to talk to if you have any issues, then we're going to take some questions. If you need a password reset or the DRGR system is down, you can contact the HITS help desk. If you need a session reset, again, using that language that Mark identified earlier, or you have some technical assistance, you can use the DRGR help desk. If you're a grantee and you have some missing information, this might happen to any of you that have not gone in and looked at your NSP3, double check. If you need some information is missing and lost, contact your HUD CPD rep immediately.
And let me just elaborate on that one a little bit. Basically, what's going to happen is if the information is not set up correctly in DRGR, then you're going to get the first draw might be rejected, and you'll see LREJ as the code. You'll end up having to resubmit, but don't do any resubmission until we get that, the CP rep works with the DRGR help desk to fix that. Typically, it's the tax ID number issue. It'll say LREJ, and that'll be your clue that this is an issue.
And lastly, if you have more than maybe a quick question and you want some one-on-one intensive TA, a few hours of time, you're able to go through the NSP Resource Exchange, and there's a request assistance section on the front page, and you're able to put in that request and get some DRGR assistance. Also want to clue you guys into where to get some of these additional resources. Again, DRGR help email, community connections is a great place. There's the website as well as there's some DRGR questions that you can look up. There's an official DRGR help site that has videos, module guides, etc. And then again, the NSP Resource Exchange, which not just has all the old webinars that you can look up and read through, as well as you can ask for intensive TA, and there's also featured FAQs on there as well. Lastly, I want to really emphasize here, when you log into DRGR, I know many of us log in and kind of move right on through the first couple of screens, but you'll notice there is information here posted on this DRGR news section, and this really is something you'll want to look at. This is where, when 7.0 was released, this is where the information came out for you. This is something, get used to starting to read this and double check what has come up early, because when there's a new enhancement and there's going to be another enhancement coming up in early fall, March maybe, that this is where that DRGR news will be posted as well. So get used to reading these. Don't just click through the beginning screens.
Right, and that's typically where if there's an issue, that the system's down or we've got a known error, that's where I post that. And that is where, again, on the other web pages like Community Connections and our DRGR help site, those I have, we're not able to change that often. So this news, I use this news section and usually blanket emails when we know what's coming up. And so I'll post fact sheets, things like that, once we know, what the particular look and feel of a new release is going to be.
I think we're now ready for questions, Vinny. Maybe we should take some from the phone first.
Sure.
At this time, if you would like to ask a phone question, please press star and then 1 on your telephone. If you need to withdraw your question, you can press the pound key. It looks like the first comes from Brian Robb. Please go ahead.
Hello, this question is from Mark Mitchell. This is Brian Robb from Michigan State Housing Development Authority, and we have NSP1, NSP2, and NSP3 grants. And our field rep has made us, for NSP2, create activities for the low-income set-aside separately in the DRGR system. And this is, we can foresee coming down the road problems with drawing funds that we may that may not end up being low-income set-aside. And we have $223 million. So we can see this becoming maybe an issue in the future with having to readjust vouchers. I was wondering if you thought this was a reasonable expectation.
Actually, this is how we expect every grantee to do it. We typically see a lot of times the activities. Say you have a city of Detroit, or one of the other cities. You'll see, Detroit Rehab LH25, Detroit Rehab LMMI. That's how we see almost all the grantees set up their activities. So, again, early on, if you find out the two ways Janine outlined are what we typically see. If you have ongoing draws, a lot of times you'll just, if you know that, this one got revised or not revised, this one is a different income category, you can offset your draw, reduce your upcoming draw by the amount, and then just make those adjustments in your performance measures too. Later on, again, if you don't have a pending draw, you just revise a draw, and it's really, you click on maintain, you adjust the amount, so say the original voucher was for $200,000 and you figured $50,000 needs to go to the other activity. It's a very simple screen where you just actually go to that draw, pick that other activity, and then put the $50,000 onto the other activity. Anytime you revise a draw, that's all on the DRGR side, so it's really not going back to locks or anything. So it's kind of a very typical one we see. We have to have those splits, though, so that we can track whether or not you're doing that targeting. If we don't have the activity split by the national objective, there's no way for us to ever determine whether or not you've met those tests. So it's cumbersome, but it's a necessary evil.
Okay. Can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yep, you're still on, Brian.
Okay. Well, I was curious. I mean, there may be times where we hit that draw limit. I mean, if there's 75% set aside in a bucket for regular activities and 25% for low income, say we hit that draw limit and we're still uncertain about whether or not those activities are going to be low income or not, we can't do a draw until we absolutely know for sure what that activity is going to fulfill.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not sure what you mean by draw limit, because you mean the daily limit, or you're talking about your budgets, where you maxed out on your budget?
Maxed out on your budget.
Yeah, typically that happens, towards the end, of the grant life cycle.
Mm-hmm.
That's where you end up with that problem more. So where you're at the tail end of a budget. So it does become more problematic at the very end of either a grant or an activity. But basically, until then, especially like on your NSP 2 or 3s, until then, there's usually plenty of room within an activity. If you get maxed out totally, a lot of times you do have to make adjustments on your budgets, and you might have to, temporarily deflate one to inflate another. So it does become much more difficult at the very end.
Okay.
It's something if you run into a stumbling block, contact the help desk, for this particular one, and then we'll try as much as possible to work through it with you.
Right. Okay. That helps, because we do have some grantees that are just flying through it and doing a lot of projects at once.
Yeah. So again, it's typically what happens is that if you get maxed out on a particular activity, you might have to, again, just real temporarily, deflate something else and inflate the others, make that change on the budget side to revise those draws, and then very quickly, deflate those activities back to the correct amount.
Okay, thank you. Very helpful.
And Brent, I'd recommend that in working with grantees that do that, if you have a field office that does maybe check your grant, especially with the kind of money that you guys have, maybe they pull a report once a week or something, you might just want to let them know, we're just doing something very quickly. This is a time period. Please, be aware of this, but don't worry when you pull a report. It's just a temporary.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
One other thing, if you're going to do that borrowing, just to do this temporary, revision, try to stay within the project.
Mm-hmm.
That way you're not, make some other activity within that project the first target of moving those funds.
Thank you.
And once again, it is star and 1 on your telephone to ask a question. Looks like we have another phone question from Valerie Fontaine. Please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, my question is, if I have one property, but it's two activities because it's a multifamily property, so I have LH25 units, so I have an activity number for that. Then I have LMMI units, so I have an activity number for that. Where do I enter in the property? Do I enter it in under the LH25 or the LMMI? Or do I count the property twice?
With regards to your accomplishment data fields?
Correct.
Yeah. I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mark, on this. I'm told that for your property, you do choose just put it into one place and make sure you note that in your narrative. But the most important part is the unit breakout. So you have one property, but I'm just going to guess here, 10 units.
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah. Or 20 units, 10 in LH25, 10 in LMMI. It's the unit count that is the most important. So choose one for the property count and make sure you note that in your narrative. But break out the units are the most important.
Okay, so if I've already broken out the units, what I have is the building is partially rehabbed, but the units that have been rehabbed are the LH25, and those are occupied. And so we actually put on the goal side a property under both categories. Do we need to go back and modify the action plan or remove one of the properties under either LMMI or LH25?
Well, either you can remove them or you can just make a cross-reference. Again, we're going to see overlap.
Okay.
In performance measures across activities.
Okay.
And so you might just, as long as it's very clear, it would be good to remove it and make sure that the narrative, the activity description describes which one, say it's reported under this other activity. But, we end up seeing duplication across activities, for a number of reasons.
Okay. And then my second question is, if you have land banking, and you selected direct beneficiary for your performance measurement, am I to understand that until those properties come out of the land banking and actually are redeveloped, you actually don't report any performance measurements?
That is correct. You don't report any actual performance measures.
Okay, correct. So you just have everything in the goal, but nothing in the actual until you actually get them redeveloped and disposed of.
And pull them out of land banking, right? Because the actual work will happen in another activity type.
Okay, so when you pull them out, does that mean I then have to redo my vouchers and my budgets because I'm moving them to another activity?
It's a great question. So for land banking, it's kind of a very specific issue. Land banking for activity is only acquisition and or disposition. There's only two activities for land banking. And then you pull it out and you put the actual rehab, for example, in a rehab activity. So only acquisition dollars and the associated project delivery costs can go in land banking acquisition, for example.
But when those units are actually disposed of, I'm counting the performance measurements under rehab, so I'm still leaving land banking performance measurements at 0.
As of right now, that is what I understand as the guidance. Are you hearing different, Mark? Mark? Oh, no, do we lose Mark?
Yeah,
I'm
sorry.
not.
I had to get on it by accident. I don't ever work with the land banking activities, so I can't really give good information on this one yet.
Okay. It's Valerie Fontaine?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and triple check that, and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
And see what we can do. What community are you with?
City of Atlanta.
Great. That is my current understanding of it. And we will also try to follow up with an FAQ to put on the website after I talk with HUD and see if that's an appropriate way to put that information out there.
Okay, great.
I know there's also for folks a performance measure guidance piece that will be coming out hopefully in the near future. I don't know the time frame exactly, but I'm hoping early fall. And I'm going to talk with HUD as well to see if we're able to insert the land banking since it's such a very nuanced conversation as a breakout example in that guidance piece as well. So please look out for all those different things. We'll try to post some more information for you.
Thank you. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Valerie.
Currently, it looks like we have no more phone questions at this time.
And for all those on, I forgot to mention it before, you can also use the Q&A function in live meeting. It's on the top of your screen, and you can type in your questions, and we'll be fielding questions that way.
Great.
And Janine, it looks like we do have a few questions in the queue.
Okay, I'll go ahead and jump in if that sounds good, Vinny.
Sure.
So I see there's a question. Someone has asked, what is the difference between the owner households versus just the number of households? They're specifically referencing one of the screens in the webinar, and I'm going to make my best guess on which one they're referencing. I hope you guys don't mind, but I think what they're referencing is in the reports module, you're able to see that there's a line for owner households, and then there's also a line for just household. You'll remember in the direct benefit, you'll notice on the screen, there's owner households, which again, you need to define for direct benefit if it's going to be owner versus renter. And so you'll have a screen for owner households, and then it automatically populates for you the number of households and totals for you that way. You'll then see both line items in the reports module as well. If, for example, you have one activity that has both owner and renter as the end use, you would actually see under this proposed beneficiary both a line for number of owner households, you'd see another line for number of renter households, and then the combination, the sum of those two would equal your total number of households.
So the screens will actually work a little bit different, I think, if I remember correctly, on the action plan versus QPR side. Since we do have prior period adjustments for recalculations, you can see that a lot of times on the action plan side, if you do have both categories or just one category, those totals are added up. On the QPR side, you know, since there are adjustments required a lot of times for when people have reselected measures, I think you actually put in the totals manually. That allows you to do prior period corrections and adjustments. So just wanted to make sure you all understand that it works a little differently on the action plan and QPR side.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, Mark, because it's a very, very it's a very, very big issue for some communities. When you get error messages, sometimes that's the case. You're thinking, but I did put my total owners in there, but it really is because you need to put total owner households and then total households. Okay, we have another question. I'm going to try to. One person asked, how can you correct for duplicate addresses? This has been a question we've heard quite a bit. And Mark, tell me if I'm wrong right now. I understand that addresses that have been done in past QPRs, really there's not a way to redact those and get out of those at this point. Is that still true?
Well, the only way is to unapprove QPRs, you know, which is something where like a CPD rep would you know, request that, you know, for a headquarters, because there's only a few of us at headquarters that actually can do those unapprovals. So for the most part, if those are ones that are going to come online and you just reported them too early, you know, then we would just ask you to wait. If it's duplicate ones, yeah, there's, you know, if it's a lot of work to do it, then we don't say go ahead and change it, you know, or unapprove those. So it's just something we actually have to live with for the most part.
Great.
In the future, one of the things we will try to do is not just have a screen that will allow us to, you know, identify duplicate activities from a census tract perspective, but we're going to try to build out where we can also show for other beneficiary data, you know, where activities are linked, you know, so for some more of the direct benefit functions. But that'll be in a future release.
We have a question that actually has multiple parts, so I'm going to try to get through a few of them. One is a question Mark answered a little bit earlier, but I want to make sure people understand this. Someone asked about the second wave of tenants in a rental project. We have to report that data in DRGR. And again, as Mark stated, that in DRGR, we're asking just for first households that meet the end use to put in that information. But as everyone knows, you're still needing to verify income as compliance periods continue based on how you set up compliance periods, et cetera. And so you still need to have that information on site for compliance, but that doesn't necessarily mean you don't need to report that in DRGR for kind of a second wave or third wave of different renters that come into NSP-funded units. That's your understanding, Mark?
Right. If you've got a compliance unit period for affordability, that's one thing that you keep on site. DRGR, you only put a unit in once, you know, when it comes online, like you mentioned.
Some people have asked, and again, this one individual did the multiple part question that I'm reading through is there was a reg change back in summer of 2010 around what counts for the set-aside and definitions around foreclosure, abandon, vacancy, et cetera. And so some people are asking kind of how do I accurately reflect that? Again, you need to determine based on those regulations what is and is not counting for your set-aside, your LH25 set-aside. And based on that, that's what you accurately report in the activities for LH25. Okay, so if you have defined an activity as LH25, you need to look at the regulations that were applying to that property at the time in which the regulations determine what that property can and cannot count for the set-aside. If it can count for the set-aside, then you do want to make sure all expenditures and accomplishment data with regards to that unit is accurately captured in that activity so you can get credit for that expenditure towards that national objective. The last part of this question also, I think, is about what to do around expenditure data that is, again, once was part of LH25 or part of LMMI, and then once you found out the end use, it's going to go to LH25. And again, you have two choices. You can do an internal reconciliation around that and make sure you keep the data files for that internal reconciliation on hand with you for the next draw, or as Mark mentioned, you can also revise a voucher in DRGR. And DRGR voucher revisions are quite easy in DRGR. Walk through the process in one of the past webinars for DRGR Beginner or Intermediate DRGR webinar, and it will teach you how to do that. So we also have a question. For the purposes of the emailed snapshot reports by HUD, can you please identify how the information regarding LH25 expenditures is extrapolated? For example, does the system use only activities that have designated LH25 national objective, or does it include all activities that include the low-income category as part of the performance measures on the QPRs? Go ahead.
Do you want me to take that, or you want to do it?
No, go ahead.
It's and correct me if I'm wrong, but it should be just a national objective. We can't break out performance data and extrapolate, down below, based on that. For the most part, what we do is track disbursements, based on the national objective.
Yes, and that's how I understand those snapshot reports. And this question is referring to the snapshot reports that are posted on the NSP Resource Exchange under the Grantee tab. If you look under the Grantee tab, there's snapshot reports that you can pull down for your own community, as well as I believe they have different levels of geographic scope you can pull down snapshot reports on. And that is my understanding. If I hear differently, I have the person's name. I'll make sure I connect with you and let you know. But I'm relatively positive that's how those.
And this is, again, the main reason, again, that we ask people to split those activities and why we're so adamant about it is that, this is a statutory requirement, and the way we operationalized it was to have you track and split those activities down to the, by national objective. So that's the only way, and again, when we see performance measures that might be mixed up, the low and mod in the same activity under LH25, that's why we question those and ask folks to clean those up.
The next question we have written in says, we use 5 activity types: acquisition, rehab, homeownership creation, property resale, and admin. Can any of these be combined like the acquisition rehab activities? It is very difficult for Mark and I to just say blanketly what can and cannot be combined. It's really how your program is designed. And I give acquisition rehab as an example. If you are acquiring a property and that same property is going to be rehabbed, you can make those combinations. For other examples, it's pretty impossible for us to make kind of sweeping generalizations around that. Can you think of any other clear examples around that, Mark, that may help this grantee?
No, I mean, there is sometimes, again, going to be performance measures overlap between, it could be, again, you could give home ownership to the same households that you did a rehab with. So there's going to be overlap. But the biggest thing, I think, the biggest confusion around this has been that if someone's categorized acquisition, it means typically, an activity, if it's under acquisition, it means that when you acquired it, you did not know what the end use was. So I think what ended up happening in reality a lot of times is that since the activity type in NSP is called acquisition rehab, the people said, oh, it's one of these two, let me pick it, and then they picked acquisition. And so that's why we keep going in and reiterating that if it is acquisition rehab, it should be, if at all possible, selected as rehab, because that's the way it's categorized as an activity type in DRGR. So we don't really have other, places where it overlaps. This was just tended to be a function of the fact that what was called in the notice for NSP didn't quite match up with the way the activity types were set up in DRGR.
Mm-hmm. I think also that's the same for acquisition and new construction, for example, again, kind of that combination. I think the other one, and this is very, very, very nuanced, there's another webinar on that you'll want to reference is demolition. You'll want to reference that webinar to understand exactly what your end use is for your demolition properties. Once you walk through that, you'll be able to make appropriate DRGR assumptions there. But make sure you go back through your demo.
But it gives another reason for another example of, again, why it might be good to go actually reclassify some of your activity types, like Janine was kind of covering at the beginning of the webinar. Typically acquisition should have been, I really didn't know what the end use was. So if there's a one-to-one, then it would be potentially good to reclassify that activity type. It's not a lot of work. The main thing you have to be careful when you do that is making sure that none of your performance measures or benefit types have changed, because it will affect, when you reclassify, it will affect those benefit types and performance measures. So it's the biggest thing to be careful of.
And if you're wanting some support around this for someone to analyze and look at what you're doing, as well as kind of think through if anything can be combined, I do recommend the NSP Resource Exchange, where it says request assistance. Some folks out there can kind of walk through this and think through this with you if you need some more support there. At this point, I'm not seeing any other questions out there. Is there anything else on the phone?
No further phone questions.
Okay. Someone stated that they just tried to get through the comcon.org/programs/DRGR and it's not coming up. Mark, is that the correct URL that you're aware of?
What was the URL again?
comcon.org/programs/DRGR.
Let me look real quick. Hold on.
Yeah, you guys can just wait on one.
Typically what I do for that one is I just type in the words DRGR training in Google, and that should bring up the correct link.
Me as well, and so I apologize, guys. Usually can
it's comcon.org/programs/DRGR.html.
Okay. .html. We'll go ahead and make sure we change that slide for posting on the webinar. I apologize for that error.
So, and one of the other things that brings up too is that right now the links on the DRGR info page, they just re-platformed it to have the same look and feel as other HUD web pages. They've been updating a lot of the look. And so those links on the DRGR info page to things like the community connections and the DRGR login aren't correct at the moment. So we've been trying for about a week to get those fixed.
Great. We'll look forward to that.
Yeah, so again, the regular DRGR login is https://drgr.hud.gov/DRGR web. And then it'll it goes into a single sign-on, so it actually, reconfigures the web page or the URL once you go onto that page, redirects it.
Great. I see another question has popped up. Are other sources of funds supposed to be reported in DRGR? It is not mandatory to report on other sources of funds. However, there is that option to report on other sources of funds. And Mark, as far as I understand, HUD is still, strongly encouraging grantees to go ahead and put that in So you're able to tell your full story of what you guys are doing as a grantee about how much funds you are leveraging and what kind of a holistic approach you have to your neighborhood stabilization with respect to different leveraging sources.
Well, and it tells more of a story, because one of the things that we don't tell a lot of times is that we are leveraging other funds. So if it's not put into the system, then we can't, like you're saying, tell the story. The odd thing, about DRGR and I think IDIS both is that you can put in other sources of funds on the front end in terms of your action plan and even list what they are. But there is no performance measure on the back end that actually one by one for each of those, sources allows you to report out on what actually was leveraged, in the QPR side. I think there's a match field that kind of lumps it all together. So if you do put it in, it really just, grantees should know that it's really only on the action plan side that you can detail those sources.
I'm just trying to follow the new questions that are popping up. So a question is, I want to know if HUD wants to know the actual income levels of the LMMI activity when I have a mix of tenants in the property. So some LMMI and some in reality with incomes less than 50% AMI, even though the families cannot count towards the set-aside. Yes, so you have, for example, in an LMMI community, you have for an LMMI project, you have low, moderate, middle income is what that they will be options are. And if you're not counting the expenditures for that property for whatever reason towards the LH25, HUD still wants you to break out. They have fields for low, they have fields for moderate, and remember they don't have a field for middle, but you incorporate that into your total. And I also encourage you to make a note of that in your narrative so that if someone does pull a report, they do see that you do recognize that there are low-income households in that project, even though you have identified that activity to be an LMMI category, not an LH25. Again, narratives are always a great place to be able to define further any nuances you have or issues you have in that sense. Any other questions that are on the telephone?
It looks like we do have one from Denise Bell. Please go ahead.
Hi, thank you. I just wanted to have you repeat that because I'm hearing all about the LMMI and the LH25, and our set-aside for the LH25 is coming from our multifamily component. So, but I'm also reporting LH25 in my single-family activity, which has low, mod, and middle, but the single-family activity, we did not use an LH25 set-aside. So in the action plan, it's LMMI. So am I hearing this correctly? Am I okay because I've used the multifamily activity for my LH25? I don't necessarily have to go back and do a voucher revision or internal reconciliation for my single-family, do I?
I'm just going to repeat to make sure I was understanding it.
I know,
okay.
It's so confusing to me, so
yeah.
I'm hoping I'm explaining it correctly.
Let me try to repeat, and then we'll make sure the question we're both on the same page, and then see if we can get to an answer. So your community has chosen to have, your multifamily activities as being designated for your set-aside.
Right.
And in that, you have single-family activities as well. And I just want to make it clear, your multifamily activities that are designated for your set-aside actually meets that 25% requirement. So you will be hitting your 25% budget as well as expenditures through those activities.
That's correct.
Okay. So now let's make sure that's correct. And then your single-family, they have a mix. You might be doing some that will be doing low, moderate, or middle income and use beneficiaries. And you've chosen in DRGR to assign those activities to LMMI.
Yeah, in the initial plan, in the action plan, the single family was planned as an LMMI national objective. But now that we are selling and we're collecting the data, then of course I've got low, mod, and middle income. and I'm reporting that beneficiary activity.
Yeah. So, Mark, unless you're hearing differently, I haven't heard anything. In any case, if you are already, if the grantee is already meeting the national objective of 25% set aside in specific activities, they have an additional activity, like, for example, yours, Denise, that are your single-family activity, that you don't really need extra, quote-unquote. You don't need to be at 35% or 50% of the low income set aside. You've already classified your activity as LMMI, and you're fine and happy with every expenditure for that meeting an LMMI national objective, not your LH25.
Correct.
Then my understanding, and Mark, please correct me if I'm wrong, then that is okay. You still need to, though, when you're doing your accomplishment data in your actual fields, put in if a unit's hitting low, mod,
and that's what I'm doing.
Middle.
So in my hearings, then just go ahead and notate that in the narrative.
Well, again, I guess, we always want to see those things reported. I think it's in this case, where we would, because we wouldn't be tracking then that you would be exceeding it. I think that ideally we'd like to see it broken out, but if it's going to be very difficult, then I guess we would have to have that discussion. Because, again, you've met your requirement. But for the most part, we've been trying to urge folks to, and again, on the single-family side, wherever they can, to break those things out.
Okay.
So I don't know that, there's a policy, requirement anywhere. It's just that, obviously, we'd like the information to be as correct as possible. But we just have to kind of temper that with, what's going to make you crazy.
So my understanding, Mike, because I'm saying this to understand for yourself, Denise, how HUD reads this, and really then, quote unquote, how the public reads it through snapshots and other type of sources like that, is that it's never going to show that you are really doing the good work of that 25% set aside other than the requirement you're meeting if you don't do that breakout. So you're kind of limiting your story, I would say, to HUD by doing that.
But again, it's mainly on that because we can't prorate those expenditures. So, you're going to be showing the households, like you're saying, because you're putting them in the right place. It's just that we won't be able to calculate the actual percent. So, but again, you've met your requirements. But, again, how far along are you on the activities? Are you towards the tail end?
We are, but we're generating a lot of program income, so we're in a recycle. We're just kind of we're still going, but
income side, that this is happening a lot of.
I'm sorry.
So is more that's happening on the program income side than the actual original grant fund draws?
No, I wouldn't say that necessarily.
Because one of the things you can do, especially on the program income side, is you can set up something, if you hadn't done these splits, you can set those up, where you've got a zero grant fund activity, for, the purpose of tracking that you're doing things, on the LH25 side. But again, the harder part is once you get towards the tail end of the grant funds, it becomes real hard to move things around.
Okay. Well, I'll take a bigger, look at the bigger picture here and see what we can't do to, I'll go back and kind of count how many low I have and look at that intermediate DRGR and see what the voucher revision entails. So we'll see if we can't correct all of that.
The biggest problem will be when you bump up against your budget, budget limits. Then it becomes next to impossible.
Okay.
Worst comes to worst, put something in your progress narrative.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
That's kind of your fail-safe at the tail end. If you can't get to where you can do any more adjustments, it's just not practical, then try to put something in the narrative. Because the main thing we're wanting to do is track it, put it in the official reports.
Okay.
If you can do the adjustments, that's great. If not, then just try to document it on that narrative.
Okay.
And always come back to, and it's not just Denise, but everyone, like, what is the story you're telling to HUD and to the public? Because that's really the story you're thinking through. And the housing count story will be, quote unquote, accurate with regards to, low, median, mod if you're putting all the information in correctly. But the actual expenditures for the set aside is something that might not be, as accurate or have that fully fleshed out. And so you have to really think about that. What's the story you're telling?
Okay.
And if I can just elaborate a little bit more too, is that we talked about those prior period adjustments. And so whether they're financial, whether they're performance, anytime, whether they're revised draws, I do urge you anytime you're making those adjustments within a quarter and things are going to change from your prior quarter, a lot of times the public, if you're posting these to your website, they're not going to understand those changes. So again, that's a good place is to put it in the program narrative, the progress narrative to say, there was a change of this nature, of this amount for this reason, just so that they can track it, because those QPRs are going to be, something for the public, but are also going to be an audit trail anytime an IG or other kind of auditor comes in and they can't figure something out. If you can do a walkthrough by putting it in your progress narrative, it means hopefully one less question you have to answer when somebody's looking at your files and saying, well, this doesn't match.
Okay. Very good. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you. I hope that answered your question.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Great. Is there any other questions over the phone?
It looks like there are no more phone questions.
And I'm not seeing any other questions in the queue right now. I think what we'll do then, if it sounds good to folks, I'm happy to stay online to see if anybody else has any questions that will hold up in the queue for a few more moments. But if not, we'll probably close in the next 5 minutes, and we encourage everyone to take the survey that just got posted. Vinny, do you have any instructions for folks on that?
No. If you just click on your screen, it should take you to the link for the survey, but it's also within the listservs that was sent out, the link to and it'll be sent out again tomorrow as well.
Great. And we will be posting this on the Learning Center, the webinar. We'll make sure we change the URL for the comcon.org so you can get the tool when you want to use that. And as well, there's an additional follow-up we'll do based on Valerie's questions on the land banking and how to do a breakout piece on that. So we'll either be able to post it on an FAQ or hope is we'll maybe get that into a performance metric guidance piece that will be coming out from HUD. I'm not sure exactly when. I'm assuming kind of early fall for that, as there's still that outstanding what do we do for land banking once it's out of the land bank, and how do we make sure we're accurately reporting on those units. We'll do that as well. So I'll stay on just for a couple more moments as you guys go through the Survey Monkey, and other than that, thank you so much for everyone's time, and good luck with DRGR. So unless there's a couple more questions on the phone line, can we just double check and make sure there's no other phone callers waiting?
Currently no phone questions.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I think we'll power down, and good luck with the summer and DRGR entries. Take care.